Um, so I would really encourage people to focus on what's my motivation? Why am I a lawyer? Why did I go to law school? What are the skills I have? What makes me distinct or different from other folks? I would really start to think about and answer questions for yourself, like, what are practice areas that are interesting to me? What are industries that are interesting to me or I like to follow? What are the types of clients that I would like to have? And you don't have to decide, right? There's a difference between, you don't have to decide what you're going to do or what your next step is, but you should be thinking about, what are the things that get me excited? What are the things that are interesting? And if you are struggling to answer those questions, and if we think about law students, I think those can be tough. Just start talking to people, right? Talk to your career counselors, talk to faculty, talk to your colleagues, and just live in the conversations about what inspires me, what brings my heart rate up, what do I like to follow on social media or in the papers. And go ahead and just prepare for, it's okay to live in the job search. You don't need to just get through the job search. You can be a job seeker and spend some time there. And I think that's the way to get started.
Those are all great points, Carrie. Rachel, once someone gives some thought to the things that Carrie just mentioned in terms of motivation and opportunity and just start to figure out the ballpark, what are some of the best resources for them for finding out about open positions?
Yeah, so that's a great question. It can be surprisingly not obvious where to find open positions. Unfortunately, there's not just one place to look for these positions. So for jobs at firms, for entry-level jobs at firms, the best bet is usually to look at firms' websites. Firms almost always have careers pages with job postings on them, especially for entry-level lawyers. This can be a little bit time intensive because you're going to individual firms' websites, but the good part of that is that you should be looking at the firm's websites to decide whether it's a good fit for you to apply. And firms will have different instructions for you on how they want to receive entry-level associate applications, whether that's to an inbox, whether that's to an office-specific inbox. And so you can, if you're kind of at the step before that, to figure out which firm's sites you should look at, besides going through all the steps that Carrie just outlined, you can also use lists that are published of law firms to start getting ideas, right? So lists by practice area or by geography to try to narrow your search from, for example, AmLaw, Chambers, Vault, shouldn't be kind of the deciding factors, but can give you kind of lists to get started. Firms do also post some firms post their jobs on LinkedIn. So you can do job searches on LinkedIn. And they sometimes will show up on job search aggregator websites like Indeed, so you can look at that as well. For smaller firms, you may need to reach out to someone directly at the firm who works in recruiting or in an office management position. This could be a good idea to reach out to someone directly at a large firm or company as well, but we'll talk more about that later today. For in-house roles, goinhouse.com is a very good resource. A lot of in-house jobs get posted on goinhouse.com. You can, of course, go to specific companies' sites to see if they have posted jobs, but that is almost too labor-intensive unless you have specific companies in mind that you're interested in. So I recommend goinhouse.com and LinkedIn. LinkedIn is a good resource for in-house roles. You can search for jobs that contain the word counsel or attorney in the location you're interested in. For government jobs, you can use, USA Jobs or the specific agency's site. For nonprofit organizations, you can use LinkedIn, or idealist.org is a good resource. But don't forget your law school's job board is a very good resource. Don't forget that there might be two, one for law firms, private sector, and another for public interest. It sounds like a lot, but as Carrie said, putting in the work here is really how you find all of the opportunities that are out there.
Those are all great points, Rachel. And just to add one other thing is not to be shy about asking people in your network, because especially with small to mid-sized firms, sometimes they aren't posted at all. I actually had new graduate reach out to me the other day and say, I saw that you were looking for somebody more senior, but if that firm would it's like a 50-person firm, they would consider a new grad, I'd love to be on the radar. And so I asked the managing partner, and it turns out they are open to looking at the resume. Who knows where it goes? But if you know someone at a firm, it never hurts to ask the question. So Lenora, I'd like to move to you. What if someone isn't sure of what they want to do? How do you cast a wide net without being all over the place?
It's tough, right? Because, you go to law school. I had the same experience. You go to law school and you're like, like Carrie said, I need a job, right? And you not necessarily know exactly what that job is, what's going to be the things that are most fulfilling. I think the first thing to keep at the forefront of your minds is it's not just getting your job, you got to work there, right? So you do need to do a fair amount of due diligence. What excites you? And it's work, right? Let's be honest, it's work. And if you're going to get especially a job in big law or actually any law firm, you're going to be spending a considerable amount of time there. So you want to look at what these firms do and what you can offer. There should be some level of match there, right? Law firms aren't going to just pick up a resume and say, hey, this person has nothing that indicates anything that they do, anything we do, and pick that person. That's just not how it works. There does need to be some commonality there. And also think about, you're not going to just send your resume. You might have an interview. What's going to be the story you're going to tell that you're going to be pulling that thread through? So I think casting a wide net, but within reason, right? Everywhere you send a resume, at least in your mind, even if they don't see it, at least in your mind, there should be some connection between what you could offer, what interests you, what excites you, and what that organization actually does. Otherwise, you may not be that happy when you get there, right? Because you just sort of taken a shot in the dark. So you do need to sort of curate where you send your resume.
Thanks, Lenora. I think that thread, figuring out, connecting the dots for people is so important. But Brian, what if you really are open to anything? You've heard what Lenora says, and you want to try and create that, but the idea of so many different things sounds exciting or interesting, or you're open to it. How do you figure out what your options are to help narrow it down so you can get to the point that Lenora was talking about?
Yeah, thanks for the question. I think there's a couple different ways to think about it as a law student looking for a job or a young lawyer looking for a job. And one thing I think that a lot of young lawyers don't understand is that getting your foot in the door is the hardest part. Getting hired is the hardest part. And a lot of people coming out of law school are, and I'm going to kind of go to the flip side of what everybody's been talking about, are like, I really want to do sports law, so I'm only going to apply to sports law jobs in the city I want to live in, which is New York or LA, right? And the problem with that is, A, there aren't a lot of those. There may not be a lot of those jobs. And B, you're in two of the hardest markets that you could be in. So I think if you're really open, you need to think about what makes you marketable compared to all the other law students. Maybe it's your background in tech. Maybe it's the fact that you're really focused on securities or litigation, whatever it is. And think about whether that marketability matches up with the potential employer. And obviously the more marketable you are, the easier it is to get in. And once you're in a firm, I'd like to give this example. My associate, and I do an energy and environmental law, she just transferred after a year to be an IP litigator. Those two things are completely different. But once you're in a firm, people like you, people know your work. If you don't like the area you're in, it's pretty easy to switch. Now, of course, you got to have that opportunity within the firm. So you don't need to be as rigid, I think, with, I guess what I like to recommend is use what you're most marketable at to get in, and then figure out what you like and whether you like it. Because a lot of us, I think if you asked all of us here today, what job do you want to do when you grow up, we would all still be probably somewhat confused. So I think, don't feel like you need to know exactly what you need to do, is some of the best advice I can give you.
That's great advice. I want to remind everybody, if as we are answering questions as the panel that we have, please feel free, if there are any nuances, if there are any follow-up questions, we're happy to answer as we go along. So feel free to put them in the chat and we will get to them. I had one other idea, just to piggyback, Brian, on what you just said. You also can back into a specialty like sports law, entertainment's another related, very popular one. You can look at LinkedIn profiles, people who do that work, or look at the job descriptions for people who have that experience and look and see what some of the basic skills are that are required. A lot of times in entertainment and in sports, it's commercial agreements. And so you can be in another practice area, but be getting some of those foundational skills and then work to transfer into the specialty because you have the basics for agreements or whatever it is.
Yeah, and that's a great point. So I think just to put it a different way, it would be, if you're interested in sports law, don't take a job as a litigator. Maybe take a job doing commercial contracting your first year or two out of law school, and then try to move into what you want, down the line in your career. Again, assuming you can't, obviously, if you can get hired into sports law in your city that you want, that's amazing, and you should do that. But I do agree, especially young lawyers. And one last stat I'd like to give is 35,000 law students graduate at the same time every year. And that's the only time that 35,000 people will be looking for a job at the exact same time. So getting a job right out of law school is one of the hardest times in your career that you're going to get a job.
So we have a couple of questions. I'll read the first ones, and whoever would like to answer it can jump in. How do recruiters view students at the bottom of the curve? And would you provide different advice to those at the bottom of the class? Anybody want to jump in on those?
I can probably help a little bit here. I don't love the phraseology because that's not generally how we think of applicants at the top or the bottom. I will just say some people have stronger resumes, stronger grades. Honestly, that's what is some of the first things we look at than others. I think know that about yourself, right? I mean, I think this is one of the times where you do take a good, long, hard look and think about what is in my resume, what documents am I presenting to these firms? We look at them, but we also look at what else is on that resume. What else is that person offering? If you're a student that some people go back to law school after having a full career, are you bringing that? Is that in your bag of tricks when you come to us? And then maybe you're interested in a practice where that could be helpful. That may be part of it. Also think about where, if you think your grades are not as high or as strong as others who may be applying for those same places, are there other places you need to be looking, right? There are a lot of places that need lawyers that are not just the top in number of firms, right? That doesn't mean that your practice has to start there, even if that's where you want to go, right? Every step along your career can be and should be additive, right? We can't sort of max out and have reached the pinnacle of our careers at our first jobs, because then what's going to keep making you show up every day, right? So get in the door somewhere in the law that either maybe grades aren't as important, or you're going in on other strengths aside from your grades, and it's a firm that takes all that into consideration. Research will help you with that. Your career counselors will help you with that. And shameless plug, talking to people, right? Becoming a mentee, talking to people in the Legal Mentor Network. We know the firms. We can help give you some guidance, right? Regional firm, different set of criteria than big global law firms. So think about that. It's all valid. It still means you're a lawyer and you're practicing law. And that's the goal, right? That's the goal. Get started.
That's great advice, Lenore. And small and mid-sized firms are not nearly as focused on transcripts as the Am Law firms. And so there is a lot of opportunity and also networking. If you get to know people, especially at those smaller and mid-sized firms, it's about you. You are marketing what you have to sell. And maybe it's not your grades, but there are other things, as Lenora said, that you have to offer, and that is what you focus on. The next question, are there any jobs or internships as a law student that may pigeonhole your opportunities down the line? For example, working your 1L summer as a clerk for the city attorney.
I can answer this one because I have a section title in my book that says, full stop, your 1L summer job doesn't matter. So as a 1L, what job you have is almost completely irrelevant. If you get a good job, sure, that's great, and it's on your resume, but when they do hiring for 2L summer positions, no one is going to expect you to have worked at such and such big law firm as a 1L summer. At least that's my experience. I do think there are, and others can chime in, specific positions that make it more likely that you will get a job when you get out as a summer associate, especially in particular your second summer. I do think it's, again, these are generalizations, but you're more likely to get a job offer if you go to a firm the second summer than if you go to a government internship or a nonprofit. But your first summer doesn't matter. Just have fun.
I totally agree. We see people that have done everything from what I really look at, you know, when I look at, did you do something interesting? It could be like your last big summer, right? For a while. Did you do something cool? Did you do some of those things that you're just like, oh, I've always wanted to spend the summer backpacking in? And did you do it, right? Because honestly, that gives you really exciting things to talk about during your interviews. And it helps share with us who you are as a person, right? And all those things matter too, because it isn't just, while there's, okay, I'll be honest, there's a lot of focus on transcripts and big, but who you are as a person is really important, because we'll be spending a lot of time together when you get here.
So I'll disagree a little bit, which is I think the 1L summer is extremely important, but not what you do, not the job you have, but what you get from that job and how you talk about it. So I don't care where the 1L summer job is, as long as it's legal and it's substantive. I care about what's the narrative that you take out of there. So even if it's, and I think we have another question, even if what you are doing, whether it's your 1L summer or otherwise, isn't sort of nominally related to what you want to do or the direction that you're going, you can create a narrative. You can talk about the value that you got out of that. And I would much rather talk to somebody who said, yeah, I want to do finance work. I worked at a small family law firm my 1L summer, but here's what I learned. I learned about client contact. I learned about conflict resolution. I learned about negotiation. Than somebody who did like a super prestigious federal clerkship, but doesn't really have anything to say about that. I want the first person every time.
And thanks for answering the next question, Carrie. So we're going to move on to, what tip do you recommend to attract the attention of the recruiter before reviewing your resume or cover letter? What tip do you recommend to attract the attention of the recruiter? So that actually leads beautifully into our next section, which is generating interest. And so, Rachel, this is exactly what we were going to talk about. I was going to pose to you, beyond targeting your resume, how do you make sure you stand out? So if you could incorporate that question into the answer.
Sure. Yeah, this is a very important point. The most important thing that you need to do is try to identify a person at the firm or the company or the organization that you can connect with in some way, right? And so you're not sending your resume and cover letter into the ether. You may also be applying online if that's the protocol, but you are connecting with a person, right? So in the best case scenario, you happen to know somebody who works there and can ask them to pass along your resume, but realistically that doesn't happen that often. So there are some things you can do to create a connection. You should use LinkedIn. You can go to the company or the firm's page, click on people, and you'll see a list of everybody who works there who has LinkedIn. I would recommend changing your settings to private before you do this so that you're not kind of coming up in every partner or an associate's views. And then look for an in. So see if you're a second degree connection to somebody who works at your target employer, and you can message them and say, oh, I see that we both know Jane, and then go from there. See if they're alumni from your law school or your college. And you can also do this on a lot of firm websites. Search for lawyers who work at the firm who attended the same school as you. You can use your law school's alumni network to find people in roles that are interesting to you, or at companies who are of interest to you, or at firms that you're interested in. If there's a specific firm you're interested in, you could ask career services if they know of somebody from your school who works there. And if you can't identify a connection, you could even just cold email or message somebody whose work looks really interesting to you. The most important thing here, though, is whether it's somebody who you do have a connection to or a cold email, the way that you approach them is very important, right? So you don't want to just start spamming people. You want to put the connection you have to the person in the subject line of your message. So, fellow Fordham alum reaching out about opportunities.
Rachel, we lost you.
Oh, can you hear me?
The sound is cutting in and out.
Okay, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. So you want to give a brief kind of introduction and explanation of why you are writing to this person, but you don't want to ask for a job in this message. And I also would not recommend including your resume in this message, because that is the same thing as asking for a job, right? So the ask in this message is a conversation, just a connection, right? So for example, you could say, I see that you also attended Cardozo. I'm a 3L at Cardozo, and I'm really interested in pursuing a career in environmental law. I have been reading about the work that Perkins Coie is doing. It sounds right in line with what I have been, targeting in my practice. I just completed a clinic where I did XYZ. If you have a moment in the coming weeks, I'd love to chat. That's it, right? And so you can just set up a phone call or a Zoom. One of the silver linings of COVID is that people are not expecting you to meet with them in person. You can just set up a Zoom or a phone call. And the goal would be that you have a conversation, you ask good questions, you tell them a little bit about yourself. And in that conversation, you're creating a warm enough connection that you could say, I applied for a first-year position at Perkins Coie. Would it be possible for you to flag my resume to the right person? And that then is, an appropriate thing to ask, because now you've had a conversation and the person kind of knows who you are. So it's figuring out how you can find somebody who kind of know, or want to know, and then figuring out how to approach them in an appropriate way, and kind of nurture that connection.
Thank you, Rachel. That was great. Anybody else have anything to add to Rachel?
I mean, Rachel, that's pretty similar to a lot of what I tell students, which is ask for advice, not a job. Never use the word job before you've actually had some connection with the person. And I'm a little more of a fan of the spam email. Certainly you're right. If you have a connection either through somebody or some other way, that is always better, and you're going to get more response rates. But I also feel like if you want to move to Miami and you don't know any lawyers in Miami, it's fine to email random, both associates and partners, not necessarily just people who can hire you. Tell them, hey, I'm really interested in moving to Miami. I'm a Fordham grad. I'm about to graduate from Fordham. I don't know any lawyers there. Would you be willing to give me some advice about which firms are great for environmental law in Miami? And you should expect a lot of lawyers to not respond, and that's okay. They might ghost you, but don't take that personally. And the name of the game is we're consultants. If people don't know you exist, they don't hire you when you're a consultant. And so a lot of it is just meeting people, lawyers. I think there's a LinkedIn 70 to 85% of all jobs come from people you know or have met. And so if you're in law school and you don't know any lawyers, you're hugely limiting the amount of opportunities you have to get jobs.
That's a great point, Brian. And just to piggyback on what you were just saying about not worrying so much if you don't get responses, because there are so many, way more times you won't hear from someone than you will. But the thing that always amazes me is the people who do take the time to respond more than make up for the people who don't. And the sharing of information that I have seen people I work with get from a random outreach, it's really amazing and well worth the effort, and all of the ghosting and all of these, sorry, I can't help you. When you hit the right person, it's amazing where it can lead. So it's well worth the effort. So we have a question from someone who had a non-legal career before and is still working in a non-legal position after earning a law degree. How do you start over when you're not young, fresh, just out of law school? This person is finding it difficult to find entry-level positions because of the prior career, especially, I guess they're mentioning M&A in particular as an area of interest, where it seems like they go for the new fresh out of school graduates. Brian, you're nodding.
Yeah, I mean, I'm nodding because I think, again, the advice that Rachel just gave and I just gave about networking is really how you're going to break through that issue. Again, without the background, if you just send a resume to somebody, they're going to say, well, you haven't been a lawyer, and that's going to cause all kinds of issues. And you might explain why in your cover letter, but a lot of people won't even read that. And so if you already have some relationship, even if it's just asking for advice, you're way more likely to get engagement, have people not worry about that, realize that you're smart and personable and have all these other attributes that are valuable. So I used to make fun of the people who said you have to network, and now I'm one of those people.
I would add one technical tip, which is that you can reformat your resume so that there is not too much real estate devoted to the previous career. And so you don't even have to include your college graduation year if you don't want to. You could just have your law school graduation year, your college. You could then have relevant experience, which would include anything that you've done while in law school or since law school. And then you could have legal experience, I should say. And then underneath that, you could have additional relevant experience or additional professional experience in your previous career. So that just visually, you're not kind of drawn to, when you glance at the resume, this has nothing to do with this position. Why is this even on this resume? But the gap is explained.
The other thing to consider is that, especially in larger law firms, we have different tracks of lawyers, right? So we have tracks that are often from people who have come straight out of law school. And then we also have a different track that's other lawyers that we have at the firm that might be bringing in the type of experience that might not be coming straight from the on-campus recruiting and the like. So look and see at some of the law firms, there might be alternatives to that. What everybody thinks of when they come out of law school, I'm going to be an associate, and some amount of years I'm going to be a partner, right? That's not the only way it works at law firms. There are other lawyers there that are bringing different types of experience or that are growing still themselves, right? So it looks like you would be, although you've had a career, you're still a new lawyer. And so you're looking for a new lawyer experience that is a bit non-traditional. I count myself in that group of lawyers, right? I was the non-traditional law school experience person at my law school for years, and they would invite me back, and because I went to Big Four, right? So when I wanted to break into a law firm, it was a little bit different, right? Because I had some experience, but I wasn't actually operating as a lawyer. So you have to think about that. And again, I'm just going to keep doing these shameless plugs because there's a lot of people in the Legal Mentor Network who have had these sort of alternative experiences, right? You're not out there by yourself. Other people have done it. Call me, let's talk about it and think about, creative ways we can get you properly positioned so that the experience you've had in the past, what's the story, as Carrie was saying, what's the story you're talking about with that previous experience? And let's make it relevant and make it important and help you find some connections.
Thanks, Lenore. So I get this question all the time. Should we spend a lot of time on the cover letter?
I know I started off by saying spend time in your job search. I don't love it when people spend an inordinate amount of time on cover letters. Like, it shouldn't become so burdensome. It shouldn't feel like, oh my God, I got to do my taxes and those things that you like put off and you never get it out the door. You got to get stuff out of the door. You got to get in front of people. So, don't get it bogged down. Having said that, it has to be perfect. It's a right example, right? So, a mistake will take you out of the running. It can be brief. Nobody wants to read a 3-page cover letter. Nobody's going to read a 3-page cover letter. And it should just connect you to the employer specifically. And I think that's all you need to do, right? I'm interested in your firm or your organization because, and then you get out. And so it looks great. It's perfect. It connects you specifically to the organization. And then I think you're done.
The one other thing I would suggest is if there is something that is not clear from your resume that you can easily explain, the cover letter is a great place to throw that little bit of information in that is relevant to the employer, but is not clear from the resume. Next question is, how difficult is it to start as of counsel? I think we might need a little bit more information. Val, we're going to come back to that. If you could explain what you mean by starting as of counsel, if you already have a career and you're just looking to move laterally, if you could give us a little more information while we move on to the next question. One of the things I've struggled with is staying connected to mentors I've encountered along the way. This is a rising 3L. Do you have any advice on that? I know lawyers are busy, but I am always afraid of being annoying. Haha. Well, this is the Legal Mentor Network. So what advice do we give to people who struggle with keeping in touch?
I mean, the advice I give is don't be annoying. But every month, 2 months, 3 months, not probably more frequently than that, just follow back up with an email about what you're doing or something that happened, like, hey, I just got a job interview at this firm. Thanks so much for the advice you gave me. It was really helpful. Or, and even I've had mentees now almost from one mentee who is now in his 2L summer who I talked to before he went to law school. And he has done a really nice job of every 3 months, 6 months. He's like, hey, you want to do a Zoom again? And I say yes. And so, you can't keep in touch with all of the people you're going to ask advice from. I mean, you're going to have to use your judgment and that you meet. But I think following up with either something news about yourself, thanking them for their help, and or doing nice things for other people is always a good idea. And, if you meet somebody like you met Rachel and then you met me and you were like, hey, you two should know each other. And you just send an email that says, hey, Brian, meet Rachel. I think you all should know each other. That's a really easy thing to do that is going to build goodwill with both Rachel and me until Rachel meets me. And then it's like, why would you introduce me to this guy?
Never. So we have a follow-up on the of counsel question, which it sounds like it might be more of a staff attorney question. Expertise in a particular field, working on cases that are relevant to very unique experience. How do you go after, if you have this background in something, getting this targeted role that maybe isn't like an entry-level associate role?
So as a general matter, an of counsel position is a fairly senior position, right? These are positions that are elevated to once you have demonstrated this particular expertise. You're a person that probably is going to be working on matters not necessarily just in your geographical jurisdiction, but perhaps for the whole firm and you've almost nationalized yourself, and a lot of your clients, because of your expertise, may be other partners and senior associates of the firm. So first, I would say that's probably something that if you're a junior lawyer, will be a bit down the road. In terms of looking for positions that have your expertise, that usually is a place where, all the research places that Rachel was talking about, you'll want to do some research on the firm. You certainly, if you have an expertise, you want that expertise to land at a firm that does that, unless you are very prepared to convince a firm that your specialty is important, and then they're going to build a practice around you, which often doesn't happen unless you're more senior, maybe even a partner that's bringing clients that utilize that expertise. So I think find a great home for your expertise. It's great that it exists at a place that focuses in that area of law or within that specialty, so you can grow and develop. And then the firm can, between you and the firm, you can figure out how your career, supports the advancement of that expertise with clients.
Thanks, Lenora. So I want to move on to interviews because we're actually chugging along, and I don't want to run out of time on some interview tips. So all of the advice that we're giving has paid off. Candidate lands the interview. Of course, they should research the company, look up who the interviewers are, and also review their resume so that they remember what they submitted specifically, because it's all fair game. Lenora, I'm going to stick with you. What is your favorite interview tip?
So definitely all the things you said. Practice, honestly. The thing that most people fail at in an interview is being so nervous that I'm not seeing you. So I have to sort of take off that nervousness filter and try to think like, what's Amy like when she's not scared to death, right? Try to relax, be very authentic. I mean, like, I don't need to know what you ate last night, but be you. Don't be the you think they would hire, because it's not sustainable, it's not real, and we want to hire real people. And practice often gives you the ability to sit more in yourself because you're just not so nervous. My other quick tip, yes, you've done the research and you want to demonstrate that you know the firm and what that connection is between you and the firm. Try not to tell the firm who they are, right? They know they're the #1 rated practice in real, right? They know these things about themselves. So that just looks like you're more ticking off a list, as opposed to, I know you have a huge real estate practice and that's really where my interest is. In fact, 2 years ago, I worked at a small construction company and that's what sparked my interest, right? That is natural, authentic, and true to your story, your narrative, as Carrie said at the top. But sharing back to the interviewers that work there, the accolades of the firm, they're pretty well aware, and it doesn't always come off very authentic.
Thank you. Carrie, what are interviewers looking for when they ask the dreaded open-ended, tell us about yourself question, and what is the best way to prepare for that?
What interviewers are looking for is they're looking for you to drive, right? They just want you to take the wheel for a while and just let you prioritize what you want to get out. I know why people hate this question. I know that people hate it and it feels daunting. But for me, it is your opportunity, right? And nobody should go into an interview thinking like, I wonder what's going to happen at this interview. You should know what you want to happen at this interview. You should have an agenda about what this person or these people need to know about you before you leave that room, the actual room, the virtual room, whatever it is. And tell me about yourself is the roadmap. Right. I actually am not trying to do a weird driving metaphor, but I think I just fell into it. So that's your roadmap. And that's, you can create the outline, you can jump right into it. Here's my deal. Here's my motivation. Here's something about my background, but you get to pick. So I really would love everybody to orient to love that question and not dread it. And you should know the answer to that question before you even walk into the room.
Thank you. Rachel, what are some of your favorite questions to suggest to candidates for when it's their turn to ask questions?
Yeah, so I think the best questions make it clear that you prepared for the interview, but also that you've been actively listening and engaging with the interviewer. So you don't want them to sound obviously canned and prepared, which sounds a little bit tricky to navigate, right? So I think the best approach is to, go ahead before the interview, come up with a few questions. So those could be something about the firm's, staffing model. And it should not be, by the way, what is your staffing model? It should be, from what I read about the firm's staffing model, I understand XYZ. Could you tell me a little bit more about a particular area that interests you or that you have a question about? Ideally, this is a genuine question, right? You actually want to know the answer to this question, and you're not just trying to show that you read the website. Maybe there's something about the associate development framework, or it could be a substantive practice question, right? About a case that the lawyer you're interviewing with worked on, or a deal. A really great question to ask is something that came up during the conversation. Earlier you were mentioning that, when you first joined the firm, you were really drawn to this. I'm also really interested in that. Can you tell me what that was like for you when you were a first year associate? So you do need to prepare by having questions in mind, but the best questions are ones that are also a little bit organic and kind of come naturally out of the conversation that you've been having.
Thanks, Rachel. A great question that I like to suggest to people that they can have in their pocket is whether someone has been at the firm for years or lateral there. You can always ask what brought someone to the firm or what keeps them there, and gives them an opportunity to share some insight into their connection to the firm, and gives them an opportunity to pitch also from their personal perspective. Brian, what are some of your favorite interview tips that we haven't covered yet?
Yeah, I do I have done and recommend a lot of the things that everybody said. I'm super into preparation before the interview. And so somebody mentioned it, I think, but I always email the recruiting person and say specifically who am I interviewing with, get their names, do a bunch of research on those people, more than just read their bio on the firm website, but search Westlaw and find a case that they worked on recently, maybe read that decision. Hopefully they won and they'll be happy to talk about it. But and then I make notes about each of the people before I meet with them. And again, as I think Rachel said, it's not because I just want to show them that I did that, but it's because I want to have the opportunity to be able to talk to them about something they're working on that's interesting, or something they're interested in, that I can showcase that, I read their case, I understand the issues in their case. And so that is priceless if you can get that. And that's not, you're not going to be able to work that in with every single person you meet with. A couple other things I do to prepare is I write out 5 to 7 questions that I think I'll get, and I write out my answers and I say them out loud a few times and I tweak them. And you're almost always going to get 1 or 2 of those questions. And when you do, you'll nail it and you'll feel better about it. Like, for example, the question that, tell me about yourself. If you're worried about that one, write it out ahead of time and say it a few times. So and then I also make a big list of questions that I might want to ask that are pretty specific ahead of time. And I use it for oh God, there's an awkward silence. What's going to happen? And I look down and I'm like, oh, here's a question I could ask, right? To keep the conversation going. So those are kind of that's my preparation technique in a nutshell for interviews. And I feel like it's a lot of work, but you know what? It's a lot of work to get an interview. And I've interviewed lots and lots of people, and almost less than 25%, I think, have actually done research about the individual people they've interviewed with. And the worst thing that's going to happen if you do research and you say something is they're going to think, oh, he did or she did research beforehand, which means they must want this job.
Thanks, Brian. I'm going to turn to a few questions that have come in. How do I pitch myself for a general law opportunity when I am a licensed lawyer in a foreign country and have obtained a specialized master's degree from a U.S. university? Carrie, what advice do you give to LLM students in that situation?
It's really find, sort of on the theme of what we're talking about, find out, talk about what those things are in your background that are going to be amazing for an employer. If you have a language ability, if you can connect with a particular, if there's a law firm who works with clients from a particular country or a particular region, that can be incredibly effective. So what are the things that make you unique and distinct with your international background that you're going to bring to the table? And don't wait for somebody to tell you that's what they're looking for. You put that narrative out into the world. And I think that's the way to do it.
Thanks, Carrie. Brian, I'm going to give you the next question. If you've previously worked or summered at a law firm, is it a red flag that you are not going back to that firm?
Well, this gets to one of my resume points, which is if you worked at a firm previously or any job previously, the two most important things that you should have on your resume on the bullet points are not research this issue or wrote this memo. They are received excellent reviews from everyone with whom I worked, unless you didn't, and why you're not there anymore, why they didn't give you the job. If it's, voluntarily left, like in my case, it was voluntarily left the firm to pursue an LLM degree, or like I had a firm offer, actually the one I went and worked at, where they gave me an offer after my second year summer, but I was applying to other jobs and I put in the bullets, received offer, but considering living in DC rather than Kentucky was kind of, basically, I don't remember exactly what I said, but you don't want to raise red flags with your resume. And that is one of the things that naturally people reading it are going to do. Why aren't you still there? Why didn't you get an offer? And, there's only so much you can do. If you didn't get an offer because for whatever reason, say why you didn't get an offer. I mean, or don't say anything until they ask you about it. But if if they liked you and gave you good reviews, you 100% should put that, because that's like the most important piece of information that you can provide to prospective employers, is that other employers liked working with you.
Great points. Rachel, the next question is, should we reapply to firms that we have previously interviewed at but did not get the job?
You certainly can. I think it depends on the circumstances, right? So if you've applied for a position as a 1L that you did not get the job, that just doesn't matter, because 1L summer positions at firms are much harder to get than 2L positions. And you can just restate your interest and apply again. I wouldn't continually apply, every month for the same position, right? But I think that you can apply, again to especially a different position, right? So if you applied for a summer associate position and you didn't get that position, you can then apply for a first year position. With some firms, if you've applied to one office and you didn't get a position, you can apply to a different office, right? So there are other ways to apply to the firm that, would still be appropriate.
I would add on that, I think if you've taken the advice of this panel and thought about networking and relationships, in addition to just sort of applying to firms and getting your resume together. I have a recent grad that I had the pleasure of working with who didn't get a job that he applied for, but had networked with the firm and has those relationships. And that's somebody that he's in touch with. And that's going to be super easy in 6 months or a year or 2 years to circle back to that firm and say, hey, I see you're looking for somebody. Can we reinvigorate this conversation? Which is an incredibly effective way to navigate the market.
I have placed several people in the late junior, mid-level stage who did not get summer positions, but really like the firm. A lot goes into it, and there's no reason not to. Like Rachel said, you don't want to do it over and over again, but especially going from a summer position to then looking at something once you have experience, there's nothing wrong with it. We have a few minutes left. I'm going to ask for some common pitfalls. Lenora, is there an interview mistake that seems to pop up, maybe not on a frequent basis, but enough that we can flag it for people coming in the door?
One that you hear about quite a bit is I've expressed a very strong interest in a practice area the firm does not have. You would think that people would find that out during their research, and I get it. People are applying to a lot of different places. People may even have variations of their resume and their cover letter, which is when you said, like, make sure you read your resume. Yeah, make sure. Because which one did you send to this firm, right? Are you like, oh, I would love to be an IP and the firm doesn't have IP? That's a really big one, because usually if that's what you're going in to talk about, you're fairly strong in that. So it's a complete mismatch if you don't. I think the other one for summers is maybe almost being too specific about what you want to do. Some firms will place you as a summer in that practice. A lot of programs have a much more fluid summer program so that you get different experiences. So coming in too strong because you don't really know, you think you know, unless you have prior experience, right? Like, I'm all in on employment, you know, they may say, okay, well, that's not what your summer will be. Your summer won't just be in one practice. It'll be a bit broader, so that we can expose you to different things and see where it works out best. So just being a little like pointed, focused, but a little flexible, I think is important, and making sure that where you're looking actually exists at the firm.
Thanks, Nora. Carrie, any routine post OCI everyone should know better but makes this mistake?
I would say the biggest mistake, and of course, students from my law school never make mistakes, but the biggest, pitfall, I think, is the distinction between going into an interview and showing that you want a job, or going to an interview and showing that you want a job with that organization, right? And if you can hit the latter, if you can do all the preparation that Brian talked about, if you can ask the great in the moment questions that Rachel talked about, that's how you show that you want a job with their organization. And employers, when they get back to me and it's not working, it's because it's not, hey, this person showed up, and they did something wrong. It was like, we didn't feel like they wanted to be here with us specifically. So that's the biggest pitfall, is just looking for a job and not looking for a job with the people you're talking to.
That's a great one, Carrie. Rachel, beyond interviews, going back to the search process, is there a common mistake that people make but can avoid?
Yeah, I mean, I think this goes back to something Carrie was saying at the beginning, which is expecting results without a lot of hard work. Getting a job is a job. Getting a job is really hard work. And I think that many lawyers or law students get frustrated at how much time and effort it takes to get a job, which I understand, because you're busy. You have a lot of other things to do and schoolwork and a life. But it truly does take a lot of time and effort to find an opportunity that will be the right mutual fit. And so doing all of the things that we've discussed is how people get jobs. It's not kind of just, sending your resume to lots and lots of places is part of it, but that's not enough. You also actually have to establish connections with people at the employers in one of the ways that we've talked about. And you actually have to somewhat customize your materials for each application, right? And so it truly is a grind. And don't get discouraged. You need to find one job, right? Once you find that job, kind of things will get much easier for future jobs. But finding that first job really takes a lot of effort. It doesn't mean you're doing something wrong. It doesn't mean there's something wrong with you. And just kind of keeping at it and really kind of taking these tips to heart.
Thanks, Rachel. Brian, how about you? Last word on the common pitfalls category.
Carrie stole mine, which was, act like you actually want the job that you're interviewing for. I see that a lot, where it's kind of like, I feel like I'm selling them on the job, and that's not a good look in general. The other thing, which I'll add, is I think the best job tip or interview tip I've heard is, and this is true of lots of interaction, not just interview, is tell a story about yourself. Be memorable in a good, positive way. Like, don't, I felt, I passed out on my front porch isn't the story you should tell. But any story doesn't have to be law related that's interesting, that is, a minute or two to tell, and that says something about you as a person, is gonna be remembered way more than anything you say to them about where you went to school, what you're doing in school, all that stuff. There's lots of studies to back this up. And at the end of the day, what happens, at least at my firm, is everybody who interviewed everyone gets in a room and they kind of vote. And if they don't remember you in the room, they're probably not going to vote for you. But I have seen many times, be like, hey, I remember that person who took that really cool trip to Africa or whatever. So try to be memorable in a good way.
Thanks, Brian. That's a great note to end on. I want to thank all of the panelists. It is exactly 3 o'clock, so we did a good job of staying on point for the hour. We want to thank everybody for joining us. Feel free to connect with all of us. Keep in touch through LinkedIn and go to legalmentornetwork.org if you haven't already, to learn more about the organization and to sign up to be a mentee or a mentor. Have a great rest of the day. Thanks again.
Thanks, Amy.
Yeah.